My name is Lynn Thoyer. I'm your moderator this evening for the League of Women Voters of Winona. Our forum this evening is with the candidates for our Minnesota Legislature, House Districts 21B and 28A. We are very pleased to have all the candidates on the ballot here this evening for those races. This year our forums are co-sponsored by AUW Winona Branch, Home and Community Options, Project Find, the Women's Resource Center of Winona, Winona Occupational Rehabilitation Services, Winona State University American Democracy Project, and social work students. We're very pleased for those of you in our audience this evening and the citizens who may be watching us live on the government access channels at home. We also want to thank the City of Winona for allowing us to have this educational forum in their City Hall Council chambers. For you, those of you watching at home, if you would please call in 507-457-8280. We do have people awaiting your calls to take them and bring them to the podium. As you know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, 99 years old this year. All volunteers organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to become educated and participate in government. We do as a league take studies and we do take stands on issues. However, we do not endorse candidates, support political parties, or tell the voters how to answer referendum questions. We will read statements from candidates who are unable to attend forums, but tonight we're so happy to welcome all three candidates. This forum is intended to provide the voters with information so they can make educated choices on the ballot. The views expressed by the forum are those of the candidates. We do encourage our members as individuals as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community. For the 2018 forums, the League has adopted a nonpartisan participation policy as approved by the State League Board. That means that we can invite all candidates, and if only one candidate chooses to participate, the forum will be held. Again, we are very pleased all candidates answered the invitation and are here. We have a few ground rules that we printed. They're out there for the audience to do. We'll just do a couple brief ones. The candidates have had them in advance, as well as the participation policy. First of all, the audience is expected to be courteous and be good listeners. It's a live cable TV audience, so we ask you not to express any concerns, make loud outbursts, or applause until the end of the forum, when we will rapidly applaud loudly. Remind you to turn off your cell phones, all electronic devices. Our taping cannot be edited in accordance with FCC rules. If rebroadcast, it will be in its entirety. We also would like to announce that if you're listening and want to watch this live streaming forum, the Winona Daily News has begun that practice for us this year, so you may watch us now on that venue. During the forum again, we ask everybody to write down their questions and or call them in at 457-8280. Our timekeeper this evening is Mary Borgen. Thank you, Mary. Our question facilitators this evening are Ruth Charles and Lori Ortega, both members of the League. We will pick questions in good faith as expressed by the League members and the audience. The candidates do not know the questions in advance. So, all questions become property of the League. We will have time limits this evening that are strictly enforced. The timekeeper will hold up the stop card when displayed, and if you don't stop, I get to interrupt you. You know, that's the way it is. So opening statements are 2 minutes, questions 1 minute, closing statements 1 minute. So now let me introduce the candidates for this evening. Running for District 28A is Jean Pawlowski. Jean is on the ballot unopposed. Running for District 21B is Steve Dreskowski and Jonathan Eisner. They've agreed to let me use their first names, and so with this, we'll start with opening statements, and we will start with Jean. Jean, please.
All right. I want to thank the League of Women Voters again for hosting these forums. As a past president of the League of Women Voters and as the only male to be at a statewide League of Women Voters convention for 2 days in Duluth, I have very fond and unique memories of the League, and particularly the situation with the designation of male and female bathrooms during that event, which I could delineate in the course of this discussion. I want to talk a little bit today about the weather. We have had rains recently in southeastern Minnesota. We have already had the state government initiate the protocols under Chapter 12A and 12B that would, if there is a disaster declared, and that disaster can be declared two ways. In 12A by the President of the United States, and you saw Governor Dayton elicit one of those declarations already this year, or under 12B by Governor Dayton, that would immediately elicit a series of protocols for all local units of government, all of those people impacted by a disaster, and we would, and this has to also be okayed by the leadership of the House and Senate, we would then have our 13 agencies immediately go into those districts and begin assistance. It also means that we would not have to have a special session. And I want to remind everyone, there is nothing special about a special session. This means the help gets to that area almost immediately. So if there is that significant damage, you know that the state and or the federal government will immediately be coming to your aid.
Thank you, Jean. I should remark, as you know, League of Women Voters means that we have no gender discrimination, so Jean, we acknowledge that you were president. Steve, you're second.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. Thanks for having me. My name is Steve Dryskowski. I represent House District 21B, which includes the southern portions of Wabasha and Goodhue County, the northern portion of Winona County, and a smidgen of Dodge County as well. I first of all would like to mention to people what an honor and a privilege it has been to represent the people, the fine people of House District 21B. And I am running for re-election, asking for your vote. There is a lot of work we have ahead of us to do, beginning with tax conformity, and we began last year. We worked very hard and diligently to develop a bipartisan tax conformity bill that would conform us to the federal tax changes that happened because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 last December. Unfortunately, that did not get signed into law by the governor, and so we are in a situation where it's going to be very difficult for people to file their federal and state taxes, well, especially their state taxes, this next year. And the first item of business that the legislature needs to pick up is that of tax conformity, get us back to tax conformity, starting with the change over to adjusted gross income, which we did include in the bill, and actually that also had bipartisan support. We've also got a lot of work to do in the area of health care and health insurance. Our health insurance situation is still in great need. The Obamacare spillover that we have right now and the residual from that is still providing for increases in insurance costs for families all across Minnesota. However, we did last year, or last 2 years, provide some state subsidies to reduce that, but there's a lot of work to do. We've got to bring a market-based approach forward, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, please.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Eisner. I am an attorney, and I currently live in Wanamingo, Minnesota. 4 years ago, I had a law practice in International Falls when I was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer, which meant that I could no longer keep my law practice, let alone keep my leg, which I did thankfully get to do because I had the opportunity to come to the Mayo Clinic for treatment. The following 2 years of 2015 and 2016, I was stuck on my couch, a prisoner to my couch, and I got to watch the 24-hour news cycle go by every single day, which included the entirety of the 2016 election, which was not tolerable for me. In the summer of 2017, I got better, and my wife and I also had our second child, Dorothy. It was at this time that I decided that I wanted to become more involved in politics and to do something about the situation, the divisiveness, the attacks on people instead of accomplishing accomplishing legislature that would help the citizens of our area. Namely, I wanted to do whatever it took to make sure that my grandchildren can grow up in Wanamingo, Minnesota, have a good income, and have the opportunities that people all over Minnesota have. So with that, I'm asking for your vote for the Minnesota House of Representatives 21B, because I really want to encourage any economic growth and any viability for the citizens of our area. Thank you.
Thank you. We are ready for our first question, and we do rotation, so we'll start with Steve on the first question. There may be times when I will rotate from the right to the left, or the left to the right, or if it's the center, so just call your name with each question. First question: how will you serve constituents in your district regardless of how they vote in the election?
Well, Lynn, I think I would continue to serve them as I have, and that has been in our House district, in every House district in Minnesota. When the reapportionment happens, there is roughly 39 or 40,000 people represented. And I think I can say this safely, that bipartisanly, the Republicans and the Democrats that I know in the House all work with their constituents as constituents. That's how I have worked with them. When I get a call from a constituent, Lynn, I don't ask them if they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green, or anything else. I ask them what the problem is and what I can do to help them navigate our enormous government, to help them find the best solutions possible to benefit them, their family, their livelihood, and their future.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I look forward to working with everybody and anybody within our district. It's one of the key things that I want to do is provide encompassing benefits that will work for everybody. One of the most obvious things that people talk about when I go door knocking, healthcare, which I am very, very familiar with now due to my experiences. Equally problematic are roads. These are things that everybody uses, and more we're being suffocated out of our road usage in the smaller counties because of how things are being handled there. Education. Moving from there, my door will be open to anybody for any reason, always. Thank you.
Gene?
I've always stated that I would represent this district in the following manner: that the district is first, the state is second, and national issues, we don't have that many because we are not national congressional representatives, is third, and fourth, last, is partisan. There's a flyer on the table outside that a study was done by the Pioneer Press in 2016. They did the entire House, and they took a look at the votes for an entire session of the entire 134 members of the House. There were two groups, red and blue. 70% of the time they voted straight party. There were only 3 representatives that were anywhere in the middle, and there was only one that was almost exactly in the middle, which meant they worked with both sides. Representative Poppy from Austin, Representative Marquardt from Dilworth, and Representative Pulowski from Winona. So I have represented this district this way. I will continue to do it.
Thank you. The second question, we're going to start with you, Jonathan. Major topic is transportation, but it's specific, so I'll read it. Are you in favor of funding our state's MnDOT Freight and Rail Office so we can secure any potential federal grants and complete the Twin Cities, Milwaukee to Chicago second train environmental impact study?
I am in researching that because when I first heard about this, I was very excited. Something that the people of our area need is the ability to get to where the jobs are. Right now I work in Minneapolis, and I see it all the time where there are tons of opportunities for people who can get to the cities, but if you live in our area, that's just not an option. So when those jobs are available to other people, we can't access them. That being said, I will never support a project that will not benefit the people of my area, which of the worst case scenarios I've seen are a zip line or the zip rail that will not stop anywhere in between the cities and Rochester and skip over us and just be in the way of us moving farm equipment across 52 and issues like that. So the easy answer is it depends. We would have to see how the project came out. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean?
Senator Miller and I introduced legislation this past session to facilitate this, so the answer is yes.
Okay. Steve?
I would continue to bring the focus on roads first in Minnesota. Minnesotans across the state believe that our first priority needs to be our roads and bridges. We've still got a great deal of work to do there. I think that needs to be the first priority. I'm also concerned about the direction of the state rail office as it works to accommodate more and more light rail around the state, and have worked in the past. As a matter of fact, was the author of the bill that prohibited state and local governments from providing funding for the outlandish zip rail proposal that would have gone from Rochester to the Twin Cities. It passed the House fully in the tax bill and was not adopted by the Senate and the governor in the end. But it did send I think, a clear message, and now because of those efforts, that project has suspended or potentially even ended.
Okay, thank you. With the third question, we're going to start with you, Steve. If elected, what are your first priorities you would like to address?
The first priority, of course, is for us to get a tax conformity bill to as perfectly as possible align the state income tax system with the federal system. We had a bill, as I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, this last session that was passed. It was a bipartisan bill, a good bill, very good bill, but was not enacted into law, was not signed by the governor. So that is the first thing that needs to happen, because there is going to be a lot of discord among Minnesotans this tax filing period because of the fact that we do not have one enacted into law. That's the first priority. The second priority is we need to work to bring some free market solutions to our health insurance system so that we can work to lower price and increase quality. Minnesota was at one time the very tops in insurance coverage and quality in Minnesota. We need to return to there again. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean?
I agree with Representative Drazkowski on the tax issue, but I think that should be a bipartisan issue that's done early in session and not wait for a tax bill at the end. This is something that if we don't do it early, we're going to have a very confusing series of filings across this state by everyone. But to other issues, and this is an issue that I've worked on since 2013 and 14 and am now working on so that we can facilitate it as session begins. I would like to see us relink our vocational technical colleges with our high schools, so that every high school senior in this state will have the option of graduating, not just with a traditional high school diploma, but with a skill set that is employable. We are in desperate need of people to be employed. We graduate 18-year-olds each year. We have unfortunately stripped hands-on learning from our schools as a result of 30 years ago moving the vocational schools out. It's time now to rethink that and to make sure that we can provide that generation with employable skills.
Thank you. Jonathan?
The first thing that I would push for is in our area, we have to have broadband access for everybody. And not just broadband, but net neutrality as well. But of course, that is kind of on the federal table right now. But yeah, it's the handing money over to different companies and having them build it as they see fit has worked out very well about 80% of the way. But the last 20% of folks who live in very rural areas are not being served because they do not have the density to push for the last few miles of broadband access. So that would easily be my number one because it's 2018.
Thank you. With our fourth question, we're going to start with Jean. The Minnesota workforce seems to be fully employed. What actions would you take with the legislature to address, if any, the disparity in unemployment rates for persons with disabilities or expanded competitive integrated employment opportunities?
I've supported legislation in the past that would allow those individuals to get a designation for employment if you do have a disability, and I'm going to continue to support it. I think that those individuals are unemployed, underemployed, I should say, and that we need to access that group. But I would also emphasize that what I just talked about when we're dealing with the vocational technical schools, a reorientation of the vocational technical schools will also help in this regard.
Thank you. Steve?
I think we need to see what type of, government inhibitions there are for the disabled folks. It's been my experience, believe it or not, that the disabled community seems to want to, or have almost a higher level of work ethic or work drive than the rest of the population. Believe it or not, that's been my experience anyway, and it's really frustrating for me to see a group of people who want to work so hard but don't have the same abilities as the rest of the population to do so, be held back. So we need to find ways to expand their abilities to find work and to be involved in it. I know there's some great programs, Home and Community Options and ORC and others in Winona here have, and our other communities do. We can do some things to get them to work together better across the state and communicate with successes that they have. Anyway, those are some ideas to start.
Thank you. Jonathan?
This is something that we dealt with a lot within workers' compensation. Somebody was trained or skilled in a certain area of the workforce, and due to unfortunate circumstances, they would no longer be able to perform those duties. I agree with Representative Pawlowski greatly on this, that providing training, many different forms of training is going to allow people to access different work, maybe work they hadn't considered before, but definitely a position that they prefer. Secondarily, in workers' comp, we learn a lot that having access to geographic access has been a huge hindrance to people as well, that if we do not have some sort of system to get them to an area where they can do the work that they're trained in, then it doesn't matter what training they have.
Thank you. Jonathan, in the rotation, we start with you first on the fifth question.
Okay.
How will you support higher education?
We need to work on funding it simply. It's one of the discoveries that has just irked me is the elementary school in Rolling Stone that has just folded in the last year. It was a school that I think 25 years old, and it required some maintenance every 5 years or so. By the point that they shut it down, it didn't have anything standing, or it didn't have what was necessary anymore, and so it was shut down. But if we would have put some foresight into it and really worked on keeping it up, this is a community that could have kept its elementary school. Secondarily is we have to have daycare options for teachers, parents, so that they can access the schools.
Jean?
We are a fourth and fifth in the nation in the amount of debt and in the number of students who carry debt across our higher education systems. You just saw the numbers about a month ago in our local papers of both St. Mary's and Winona State. When I was the chair of higher education in 2013 and 2014, we froze tuition for the first time in the history of this state, and we paid for it. I'm going to emphasize that. We paid for it. Not the shell games that you've had since, where you freeze it 1 year and not the next, or you take from the 4 years to freeze to the 2. We have to address the carnage that was done during the Great Recession to higher education. Record cuts, record tuition increases, and frankly, an administration that got bloated to the point where when I chaired it, we actually had to put into law that the people with the highest salaries in this state ought not to get a bonus, and that bonus comes from the students.
Thank you. Steve?
First of all, I think there are some areas we can reduce redundancies, and there's been discussion about the central administration to Minskew and the redundancies that happen between there and their respective campuses. And Representative Pulowski actually has done a lot of leadership, provided a lot of leadership in that area. We got a lot of work to do there yet, though, and that has to be carried out. Also, we need to hold the administrations accountable, not only Minskew and the U of M to the extent we can, given their institutional autonomy, but also to their respective campuses. Spending seems to be the side of the equation that rarely receives the scrutiny with higher ed that the revenue side does. They're always coming and saying, more money, we need more money, but we don't seem to see the same focus and the sharp pencils on the spending side of the equation. We need to encourage that as well.
Thank you. This is our 6th question, and we start with you again, Steve. What will you work to do if elected to improve health care for Minnesotans, especially those with pre-existing conditions?
Well, I had a bill actually, and I offered as an amendment on the House floor last year that would have provided more flexibility, given the Minnesotans the ability, if they wanted to work with their insurers to buy catastrophic coverage, and then to be able to couple that, if they wanted to, with another savings, a health savings account or a medical savings account, in order to provide more control over their health care expenses and to direct and focus the expenditures more properly to what they need. For instance, in Minnesota, we have 68 or 70 different mandated coverages, the highest, as I understand, of any state in the country, which means that if you are a man, you have to pay for pregnancy coverage, and if you're a woman, you have to pay for prostate coverage. Those are things that just don't make sense to Minnesotans in areas that are very ripe for reform.
Thank you. Jean?
Almost all of the issues that we deal with in healthcare are beyond the capacity of the state, both legally and fiscally, to address. This is an issue that has to be addressed by the federal government. We can do some fringe things, but we don't have the resources. The minute you put any type of legal barrier, if it's an insurance company, they move out of the state. We don't have the fiscal resources in our budget to do it. So this is the time where the federal government is going to have to decide how health care is going to be delivered and how it is going to address what partially has become a federal problem. And now the states, in a state like Minnesota, because we live in southeastern Minnesota, we have the anomaly of the Mayo effect, which was not taken into consideration when the Affordable Care Act was passed. So most of this is going to have to be addressed federally.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yes, federally, a lot of things are going to have to happen in order to free us from our situation. But, and this is probably one of the most important things, absolutely critical reasons why I'm running, because the legislature that Representative Drazkowski was discussing is commonly known as zombie care or the buffet choices of health care. The reason that a woman would have to pay for a prostate exam is because that is the fundamental purpose of what insurance does. You put into a pool so that when other people are sick, they're taken care of. I maybe won't get pregnant personally, but it's very important to me that if you do, or if anyone in my state does, that is taken care of, that baby is brought into this world as healthy as possible, and when they get here, that they continue to be taken care of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With the next question, we start with Jean. Will you support improved gun background exams for all gun sales? Do you support red flag laws?
Unless I see the actual legislation, I'm not going to respond. You've got here issues that, the way you've termed them, a yes or no answer can be interpreted by either group in ways that I don't think the legislation would actually be introduced or passed. So if you want to deal with gun legislation, let's see the bill and let's see exactly what it does.
Thank you. Steve?
The short answer, Lynn, is no. Those approaches don't provide us anything of value. They won't decrease gun violence. They won't make our schools safer. We need to engage in policy and approaches that will help our mental health of our kids in schools and start to look at those. Look at the familial breakdown that is contributing to these issues and the problems. But to simply provide more restrictions on guns and further degrade the Second Amendments of law-abiding citizens, which each of these proposals that were brought forward the last couple of sessions and continue to be brought forward and discussed in the public sphere, none of them will get us anywhere closer to helping what the issues are. So the answer is a definite and solid no. We actually need to decrease the restrictions we have on firearms in our state and country so that law-abiding citizens can continue to protect themselves and their neighbors. Thank you.
Jonathan?
This is where I'm going to disagree with, well, both representatives. It doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter how I handle this, because the way that it's going to come out in the laundry is that I am anti-gun, which I'm not. I'm a hunter. I look forward to teaching my my daughter, how to responsibly use firearms as outdoors Minnesotans. That being said, the Republicans' position on this right now is that any involvement with guns is an attack on the Second Amendment, which is inherently false. This is not how the Founding Fathers established the Second Amendment to be a free-for-all. It was not within the consideration when the executive branch was giving the authority to bring in militias during time of war.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This question, Jonathan, is number 8, and we start with you. How would you work to increase affordable housing in southeastern Minnesota and statewide?
Again, in my mind, it is a position of access. With the jobs moving more and more towards the Twin Cities and large groupings, the ability for people in their 20s, 30s, people who have to pay off college debt, people who want to raise their children in an environment where their children will have access to things. These people cannot live in greater Minnesota anymore. At the same time, they can no longer afford to buy houses because the population density of the cities is exploding. So I would want modernized transportation, fix the roads, find new ways for people to travel, and remove this bottleneck so that the free market can allow access to greater Minnesota, and it'll come out in the wash there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is question 8 on affordable housing. Jean is next.
The trick on this is to create affordable housing with government input that doesn't create the type of situation we had in the 60s and 70s, where the government got involved in housing and what we created were slums. There have been groups of legislators, I'm one of them, that has been distinguished by the Housing Coalition across the state for working on solutions to housing. But this is a complicated issue. With government involvement, you have to be able to create housing that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be long-term, and that will not create the situation that we had in the 60s and 70s. And that is a little bit more difficult to do than we thought it would be.
Thank you. Steve?
First of all, I would maybe suspend some of the direction we've been going as a legislature in the last few years to expand the areas in which government has been building housing. Now we're into something called workforce housing, where we go look at certain parts of the state where there happens to be a large employer that draws employees from a long ways away. Obviously, in those situations, it's not the fact that the housing is a problem, but the business model is a problem to begin with, realizing they built way away from the actual workforce, which what we find ourselves doing instead is the taxpayers of Minnesota are subsidizing that decision. We had to stop doing those types of things, use our limited resources to do a better job with the low-income audiences that our housing dollars were intended for to begin with. And then lastly, we need to stop putting more and more regulations on the private sector that works to build houses, whether it's codes in plumbing, electricity, or other construction.
We're going to start with question number 9. Steve, with you. Do you feel you can propose legislation to help with the opioid and alcoholic addictions? If so, what policies would you like to see put in place for funding this purpose in our state?
Well, there was a variety of proposals last session, and first of all, I think we need to do a better job of identifying the problem. We've somewhat identified the problem, but there's so many elements and it's such a big issue that I don't think we've done a good enough job as a state analyzing where it's at. I think as we look at it, I think the area that most of us can agree on is the area of access to the opioids to begin with. They begin with a prescription from a doctor generally, and we need to look at that whole environment, how they're done, how they're managed, et cetera. But there's other people who want to have proposals to tax the pharmaceutical companies and of course then take that money and think the government is going to be the center of all solutions. And that model has tried itself over and over again and failed. It's the wrong direction. We need to do a better, more precise approach.
Thank you. Gene?
We had a solution in the supplemental funding bill at the end of session. I was one of 10 legislators that was on the conference committee. I was the only Democrat on the conference committee. The governor ultimately vetoed the bill, and this is the supplemental bill that grew to about 990 pages. And the opioid issue was one of the reasons why I supported the bill and why when the speaker came and asked me to serve on the conference committee, I did. Today we've received news from the groups that are supporting the opioid solutions that apparently something is moving through Congress right now that will be of great help to the opioid crisis. That doesn't mean that we won't have to do more work when we get into session in January. So we had something, I think it would have worked, it was in the supplemental bill. Congress obviously right now is moving on something, so hopefully when we get to session, we can actually work with Congress.
Thank you. Jonathan?
One of the things that we have to do is definitely do a lot more research looking into models of addiction and issues along those lines. One of the things we have to start considering is deregulating the restrictions on marijuana. As a cancer survivor, this is one I had a lot of experience with. Not marijuana, but with opiates. As my leg was healing, I had scar tissue that squeezed around the nerves in my leg, which was not pleasant. I had no problem getting prescriptions to opiates because that's what was available for my extreme pain. If there was something less addictive, if there was something less harsh, that would have been fantastic for me at the time.
This next question, which is number 10, we start with Jean. There have been concerns regarding sexual harassment at the state capitol. What is your position on sexual harassment complaints, and what policies would you like to see continued or implemented across state government?
Well, before I was a member of the League of Women Voters, I chaired the Winona Human Rights Commission, and we dealt with those issues for 4 years when I was on the commission and when I was chair. We went through 2 very intense years in the legislature dealing with this issue. I don't think we've resolved all the problems, but we've come a great way from what happened in the beginning of this session in 2017 until the end of the session in 2018. So I have supported reform. We all as legislators had to go through workshops in order to address the issue. I think the climate's better. Could it be improved? Yes. And I'm sure in the next session we'll have more legal remedies depending on who's governor and who's controlling the House.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I think we have come a long ways, but there's certainly work to do. You know, it's all about respect. You know, my observation has been people who have issues with this are people who just, I don't know, it's not a very large number of people, but it's in every population, whether it's in a legislature, whether it's in a state agency or somewhere else. But we have to do things that foster respect between individuals, and if we do that, I think that will come a long way in helping the situation. We've done some work on our House rules, and I think that's what Representative Pawlowski was talking about as well, an area that we continue to need to work about as we get our House, the House of Representatives, in order around this particular issue.
Jonathan?
For dealing with sexual harassment, domestic violence, anything building from that, we have to, as a culture, start to work a lot more purposefully in doing investigations, in looking into these issues, and not assuming that, not making any assumptions in any direction. And we just have to be able to we have to be able to gather the information that is necessary for this, but it cannot be hindered by just by any facet. This is something that my wife, she's a prosecuting attorney, she deals with just all the time, and within that level, within the criminal side of domestic violence, Minnesota's working hard on developing, pushing best practices.
Thank you.
And thank you.
The next question is 11, and we start with Steve. The DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. Processing software has an awful lot of problems. What legislative initiative would you propose to solve these problems besides just spending more money?
I like the last part of the question, Lynn. You know, the program is called MNLARS, Minnesota Licensing and Registration System, and it actually began almost 10 years ago, and I was in the legislature when they started placing the current fee on your registration, driver's license, and other things that they placed the fee on in order to pay for this. And the agency kept coming back to the legislature each or every other year saying, well, we need more, we need to extend the fee, the tax. And it just continued to degenerate into something that eventually didn't work. And I think the answer to the question is we're going to need to jump outside of the government model, this really union protectionism that is involved in state government that's protecting this issue needs to give way to some private sector vendors who can actually do the job correctly.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I think we just need to continue looking into it and fixing it. It's one where the research that I've done into this issue is there were a lot of poison pills that were put into it. It was set up so that MNLARS could be taken care of, could be built, but then it wasn't given what was necessary to keep it going. So it was like saying one party came forward and said we need to have a car, and then the other party came forward and said, great, but you don't get to use wheels. Well, MNLARS is a program that has all the ability to work, and we just need to continue to use it, and we have to modernize, and we have to create an environment where we're not afraid to modernize and then politicize everything that extends from that.
Gene?
We've had 2 disasters in this state on rollouts of systems that weren't tested. MNCHOR was the first. We should have learned from that. Now there's MNLARS. So I agree with Representative Drazkowski. State agencies do not have the expertise or the capacity to create these types of systems. For a fraction of the cost, we could go outside of the state system, have a system that's tested and ready to roll out, and then if there is a problem, we know exactly who to blame. Because frankly, when you get with these agencies, it's very difficult to figure out who is to blame, and somebody is to blame. So it's time to shop these out.
Okay, thank you. The next question, number 12. This time we'll start with Jonathan. Do you favor more legislative expenditures for the expansion of broadband services outstate Minnesota?
Yes, I do. Mostly because I said earlier that that would be my number one issue. It has come to the point where the students in rural areas, students' families have become second-class citizens. I know the debate is about whether or not it is a utility. I like to take it a step further. I say it is a fundamental right that we need to have access to broadband. Fundamental because having access to information in equal proportions is how we do a democracy. This is how people have information, this is how they have conversations, and this is where they discuss. So if we have groups of people who have broadband and other groups of people who can no longer communicate, we're no longer running a successful democracy. For me, it's really that basic.
Steve?
You know, we really, I think, have put enough into this particular area. Everybody in the state, everybody in the country, everybody in North America has access to high-speed internet right now. And that's satellite internet. HughesNet and other competitors offer that everywhere in the continent. And so to claim that people don't have access is, number one, not true. But the question is, do we want government to be in the position of extracting money from groups of people and using that money to pay for someone else's internet connectivity? Now, I choose to live where I choose to live based on a number of factors, and those are my choice. If I want to move where there's hyper speeds, I'd move to the middle of Minneapolis. If I want to have better quality of life than living on the pavement, I might live out here. Those are life choices, but we can't continue to tax people to engineer this particular technology so everybody's got the same thing.
Thank you. Question 13, Steve, we start with you again. Think about the ways. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
This
okay.
always happens to me, Jean.
It's probably good that you did, because I'm going to have to correct you. We are not outstate. Let's get that straight. We are not outstate. We are greater Minnesota. Outstate is Wisconsin, it's Iowa, it's the Dakotas. We are greater Minnesota. The metropolitan area is lesser Minnesota. We're greater, they're lesser. So let's get that set right now. This is the age of information. The age of information needs bridges and roads. That's broadband. We built bridges and roads for every other type of information transportation system that we've ever done. So I think it's the age of information. Broadband is the way it's going to be delivered.
We will let the correction go to the question person, okay, who wrote it. Thank you.
That's all right.
Okay, now Steve, question 13. Think about the ways that raising and spending money has affected your campaign or campaigns and or your work in office. Do you support requiring campaigns to identify donors and amounts for all election spending, including independent groups, immediately upon receipt? Please state your reasons for your answer.
That's an interesting question, and I think we definitely need to do some more work in that area. You know, I don't agree with you know, former Representative Winkler's bill to you know, squash Citizens United. But short of that, I think there are some things we can do to strengthen our laws and our transparency here in the state of Minnesota, which we, by the way, I think already have pretty good laws compared to other states, but I think there's a lot more we can do. Personally, my campaign, I have never taken a dollar from PACs or lobbyists. They send me thousands of dollars each campaign cycle, and I send every one of them back, and will continue to operate that way in my campaign. But not many campaigns do that in the legislature. And once you're above the legislative level, you can't afford to run a campaign without the PAC and lobbyist dollars, just because that's how it is. So anyway, those are some thoughts, and she's going to flip the stop sign up, so I'm done.
Thank you. Jean?
We need to do more work. There are individuals who say, you know, you don't take PAC money, and yet PAC money is given to the Senate district, and then the Senate district launders it to candidates. So when folks say they don't take it, there are ways of getting PAC money without saying you took it directly from a PAC. If I take PAC money, it's listed there. So you can see the PACs that supported it. The latest I think I got was $100 from the Agricultural Alliance. Boy, there's a real controversial group. And we do have a lot of ag in this district. Do we need to do more? Yes, we do. I would say we need to set very tight limits on campaigns and stick to them, period. That's for everybody.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I am in the camp that we need to overturn Citizens United. The idea, how money has become speech involved in our campaigns is just absolutely destroying everything. And I say that as someone who has fought tooth and nail for every dollar that he's received, but also as somebody who's looked over the legislation in the state of Minnesota, and you can see where ag policy has been balanced against petroleum policy, and petroleum policy wins in our state. This seems strange to me because I went through and I counted all the oil fields in Minnesota, and then I counted all of the soybean fields in Minnesota, and there was a very disproportionate number between the two. And so something else is influencing what is happening in that situation.
Thank you. The next question, did I reach everybody on that question? Okay.
Yes.
I think so. Okay, we're now on to question 14. We're going to start with Jean. How do you approach difficult issues? Can you give us an issue that you perceived was difficult related to the passion you are seeking and how you would approach it?
Yes, and I'm going to deal with it right now, dealing with disasters. When we had the largest disaster in the history of this state in 2007, we had a special session. And the bill that was produced was a mess. We had to continually go back and say with legislative intent to spend the money was this way or that way. So 2 weeks after that special session, I met in my office with a representative from Governor Palente's office, and also with my staff and with the revisor's office, and we began to draft legislation that became Chapter 12A, which is the playbook now by which we address disasters. There were 13 drafts over the next 3 months, round-robined each time with 13 agencies so that we would get a bill that would be able to be accepted by Governor Palente and that, more importantly, would be able to work. So if you want to produce good legislation, it takes time, it takes drafts, and it takes working with everybody.
Thank you. Steve?
Lynn, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand it.
How would you approach difficult issues? Can you give us an issue that you thought was difficult or perceived was difficult and related to a passion you are seeking, and how would you approach it?
Okay.
Related to the passion you are seeking.
Okay, thank you. Well, one of those passions is to bring government to be more accountable for the $46 billion of taxpayer money that the general fund spends each year, and then that's not to mention the special funds that are about an equal amount when you add those up next to it. One of the areas one of the approaches that I've taken as a legislator is I have talked in great deal with the state legislative auditor about his efforts and his office's efforts around the many audits that they do. One of them was the one dealing around Medicaid and the waste, fraud, and abuse that was documented by that office in their multiple audits, where they documented anywhere from $115 million to $271 million of taxpayer money that was given in the form of Medicaid programs to people who didn't qualify for them. That money was spit out the tailpipe of the car, hit the pavement, and rolled into the ditch. I've worked on legislation to do that. It hasn't been signed yet, but I'm going to keep at it.
Thank you. Jonathan?
When I went to law school at Hamlin, my focus was on mediation. Mediation is the process of breaking down a problem into its bare elements, figuring out what you need to do to fix it, and moving forward. In that situation, so I want my grandchildren to be raised in Wanamingo. Of course, my son is 4 years old, my daughter is 1, and well, the third one's not born yet, due in March, by the by. What do I have to do to have my grandchildren be raised in Wanamingo? I need there to be, I need them to have access to some sort of economy, some sort of functioning, growing situation. Well, how do I achieve that? Well, I need to have roads because people need to get to work. I have to have healthcare because no business is going to build in an area where they can't have people get to work because they're sick. We need to have daycare so that people can stay at work when they get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In view of the time, that was your last question. We're going to now move to closing statements. And we do mix the order again. So Jonathan, you get to start with first closing statement, and then we will go to Steve and to Jean.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for having us all here today. It is these kind of situations, it's these rooms where I am very, very encouraged by what democracy is and what direction we can still go in. In door knocking across 21B, it's been just an amazing realization of how people's issues are not they're true. What they're really worried about are not connected to with what the divisiveness, the hatred that we see on the news. And so seeing a room like this is just phenomenal. With that being said, it is this area, it is this small level of democracy that I very much want to help build and refocus on. So thank you very much.
Steve.
Thank you again for the opportunity, for inviting me here tonight. I will continue as your state representative, if you'll have me for another biennium, to work to limit the size and growth and scope and control that government has over the lives of you, my constituents, and will work to reduce taxes, limit government spending, create a market-driven healthcare system that provides for market competition that increases quality and decreases costs. And I will continue to vehemently work hard to protect your guns from those who want to take them from you, and will continue to protect life at every turn. Thank you again, and I ask for your vote in November.
Thank you. Jean.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all, and I would hope that I'm going to revisit the issue again of what we should do with our workforce shortage and what's happened with vocational hands-on learning in the schools. I would hope that 2 years from now, we'd be able to tell you that we have moved where we were 30 years ago and restored hands-on vocational skill set learning to our high schools, so that students graduating from our high schools would have an employable skill set at their option, not mandated, and that we would take full use of these technical vocational colleges, which originally were part of our school districts and were paid for as part of our school districts. It was a mistake to do what we did 30 years ago. We can correct our mistakes, and we desperately need those young people as employees.
Thank you. We want to thank all of our co-sponsors for this evening, and also HBC for taping this forum so that the League of Women Voters Winona can place it on their Facebook page within a few days before the November 6th general election. Be sure to vote. We also want to invite you to more upcoming forums. We have 4 left in our series for 2018. October 10th, we'll be in the City Hall chambers here for the Winona Area Public Schools referendum question at 6:30 p.m. and at 8 p.m. for the candidates for their school board at large and for districts 1 and 2. October 15th, we're going out into Winona County to the city of St. Charles, and we are doing their city council and the mayor seats, 2 city at-large seats. That will be held at the St. Charles Community Center at 830 Whitewater Avenue Street, and will also be taped. It will not be live, but it will be, again, placed on our Facebook page. Our final forum in the series for 2018 is October 18th back in City Hall Chambers, 6:30 p.m. for Winona County public officials, attorney, auditor, treasurer, recorder, sheriff. We will also have statements from the Soil and Water Board, who are unopposed supervisors. We want you all to be registered to vote. If you've moved or you have a new address, you can get online and go to the Minnesota Secretary of State's office before October 16th and do it yourself. All you need is a driver's license and or a Minnesota ID or social security number. We also encourage you that if you cannot get pre-registered, you may register in Minnesota at the polls. Do check that Secretary of State's website because many items are needed at that site at the polls so the election judges can get you duly registered the day of elections. Again, please vote. The general election, the polls are open Tuesday, November 6th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Thank you and see you at the polls. Good night.
Hey, when you were starting to answer that other question, I thought you were just giving thank you sign comments. So you were actually answering. Thank you.
Very glad to hear that.
Yes, exactly.
No, that's the way I use it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. 14 questions, just so you know.
When you only have 3, that's what you get.
Well, yeah, and when there were 6, we got 6.